So can I just introduce Andrew? Andrew Best is a PhD candidate and a sessional staff member at Griffith University Film School. He's going to be speaking about his project on Moth of Moonbi, and which to me raises fascinating philosophical questions as well as practical ones. And we've chatted about this in preparation for today's event. But it really brings up all sorts of issues. So we get to the Q&A after Andrew's given his presentation. We're going to have a discussion of some of those issues. The work he's done is online, and in the invitation that was sent out to friends, there's a link there to see the work that he's done. And hopefully everyone's done that, and you've got some background to what he's going to tell us. Andrew, I'll turn over to you. You can share your screen, and we'll get going.
Sure. Okay. Okay. I might have to quit and reopen Zoom. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, do that.
I'll be back in just a second.
Yep. Okay. All right.
Well, it's good to see you, Ray. It's been quite a few years, that's for sure.
It's been a long time, Rick. It's been a very long time, actually.
Yeah, look, my life just seems it just takes on its own form. But I've been very busy over the years, just trying to sort of keep all the legacy alive and all the work of my mother and grandmother and so forth. And so I quietly work behind the scenes. Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, Rick Carlson is Charles Chauvel's grandson, and so is the keeper of the family legacy.
Which can be a bit of a blessing and a curse sometimes, because there's so much material to work from, and with the 9 feature films, and I'm finding things all the time. That's the amazing thing. I'm finding foreign film posters keep popping up from overseas, and pieces in different archives, and yeah, wonderful. Really is terrific.
Yeah.
So it's been an amazing journey just in itself, in keeping and also adding to that archive.
Yep. Oh, that's good.
Which is great.
Okay. Can I just check? Can you see my?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, I can see it. It's great.
Is that all you can see?
You need to click on start the slideshow.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I apologise for that. So let's get underway. Right. So you're seeing all this.
Yep. Full screen now.
Yep.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, as Ray's introduced me, I'm Andrew Best, and I'd just like to start by acknowledging respectfully acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which this event's taking place. I'm speaking to you from the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, and I'd like to acknowledge the Cubby Cubby and Jinnaburra peoples, who are the traditional custodians of the Sunshine Coast region. I'd also like to recognise and pay respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders of the past and present, and recognise any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today. Hope you feel welcome. So let me just start with a little bit about me. A few little pictures worth 1,000 words, even in this day and age where pictures are plentiful. Basically, as Ray said, I'm a doctoral candidate at Griffith Film School at Griffith University in Queensland. And I'm basically a classic film obsessive, like many of you, I guess, with a background in short form documentary. Some of these photos sort of tell that story a little bit. Some of the short community documentaries I've done about cinema locally. And the picture on the left is me as a 15-year-old with my Bell & Howell TQ1 16mm. So even though I'm a child of the 80s and grew up with a lot of VHS, I saved up when I was about 11 or 12 and bought myself a projector after seeing a screening in a church hall of Casablanca, and I just was fascinated by the 16mm projectors. So it's been a long passion for me, and now I'm sort of exploring things at a doctorate level, which is a surprise to me as well as probably to other people. So my interest in Charles Chauvel is I've always, as a filmmaking pioneer and Queenslander, is probably where that comes in. And I managed to get a 16mm print of Sons of Matthew in my younger days, and it was always amazing to me to see this film that was shot about 100 kilometers, south of where I live. That I've been used to seeing gains for melodramas and Ealing comedies and Hammer horror films and all these things that they show on late night and early morning ABC, and here was this film of that time, and that was so close to where I lived, and so I quickly over a period of time got to see many more of Chauvel's films, and it really became he really became, as I said, a touchstone for my own filmmaking ambitions. His relentless his DIY approach to things, and that wild ambition that he had. So we're talking about The Moth of Moonbi, and The Moth of Moonbi is a Australian silent Western melodrama. It's generally considered to be Queensland's first feature-length film, and it's of the records at the time show that it was 9,000 feet originally in length. It is the directorial debut of Charles Chauvel, so his first film, and I should have mentioned the year, by the way. So it was released in 1926. I think I might get to that in a second. It is based on a novel, a 1924 novel by Brisbane author Mabel Forrest called The Wild Moth. So that was adapted by Chauvel. It was the first film produced by Australian Film Productions Limited, which was a film company set up by Chauvel, and it had a number of pastoralists and Queensland businessmen. And the budget for the film was £4,400. The film was shot from April to July 1925, various locations, a lot of which were in the Fassifern Valley in Queensland, about 100 kilometres southwest of Brisbane. In Brisbane City itself, including the interior scenes in an outdoor studio. And there are also scenes of cattle droving that were shot a bit further north at Fitzroy Vale in Rockhampton. The film premiered following a number of preview screenings, some as early as September of the previous year, 1925, and then again in December and early January. But its proper world release, as the advertising of the time shows, that it was the 25th of January 1926 that it was shown publicly at the Wheater Garden Theatre in Brisbane. 6 prints of the film were made and distributed throughout Australia during 1926-27. Although I've found a lot of newspaper reports that show the film still being screened in 1928. So it sort of was still doing the circuit around then. The film was also reportedly shown in London. It was taken by E.J. Carroll there on one of his visits, and apparently shown. So what is it even about? Here we have a production still. Doris Ashwin is the main character, Del Ferris, in The Moth of Moonbi. And basically, The Moth of Moonbi tells the story of Del Ferris, who is a country girl who, according to her intertitle introduction, lives a life of blows and rough words with her abusive father on Moonbi Station, which is a cattle property. When Del's father suddenly dies, she receives a £500 inheritance and is drawn, like a moth to flame, to the bright lights of Brisbane in search of life, liberty, and happiness. While there, in the company of high-living flappers and well-to-do dandies, Del's money soon runs out, and as a moth with singed wings, she returns to the bush and finds love with local jackaroo Tom Result. So that's essentially the story. So this is part of my interest in the film, is that these number of things, that it's a historical significance as Queensland's first feature film. It's the directorial of a filmmaking pioneer like Chauvel. It really is little more than a historical footnote at this point. That's largely due to the fact that only 1/4 of The Moth of Moonbi survives, so approximately 33 minutes of the 2-hour feature. As you can imagine, this is not a continuous 33 minutes, but rather fragments of the film that collectively make up 33 minutes. So the narrative is fragmented and incomplete. As an incomplete silent film, The Moth of Moonbi is underappreciated and largely unknown. Sorry, was someone saying something? No? So I'll keep going. As an incomplete silent film, Moth of Moonbi is underappreciated, largely unknown, and is little more than a footnote in the filmmaking, the history of filmmaking in Queensland. So, yes, okay. So, what is a lost film? I know that this is a question some of you are well aware of and can answer, but for the benefit of those that may be not aware, a lost film is one that no longer exists, and I've taken this from your book, Ray, yours and Andrew Pike's book, Australia's Lost Films. I think this is a great definition. Is one that no longer exists, or at least is not identified amongst the holdings of a film archive, production company, distributor, or other publicly known organisation or collection. So in other words, it is not in one of the places where one might usually seek to find it. David Pearce, in his extensive work, various reports and writings on American silent film, and the high rate of loss of those films, he has found that 70% of American silent feature films released prior to 1930 are completely lost. So I believe, yeah, I won't quote the figure because I can't actually remember it, but I believe there's 3,000 odd films that survive in whole or in part out of 10,000, over 10,000 films. So for us in Australia, obviously our output was far less than that. There's an estimated 250 Australian silent films that were produced, and roughly 50 of those survive in whole or in part today. Oh, and I should have said that picture was one of those films. This is one of Snowy Baker's westerns, The Shadow of Lightning Ridge, which the footage of the film at least is lost. So this brings me to this statement. This is in a paper by Vinzenz Hediger, who is a professor of cinema studies at Goethe University in Frankfurt. In his paper, The Original is Always Lost, he says, well, what do we do with these film fragments? Do we mend it, mourn it, or just forget about it? So, as I've said, many of the surviving films from the silent era are incomplete, and a lot of these exist only as fragments. For these incomplete films, reconstruction of the film, and some of you may be aware with various reconstructions of films, use of production stills for missing scenes, etc., like the wonderful job that Graham Shirley and Ray Edmonston did with for The Term of His Natural Life, for instance. You're able to fill some gaps in the film, but for a film where so much material is missing, that reconstruction is impossible. Such films, these ones that cannot be reconstructed, seem destined to remain fragmented and forgotten in film vaults and archives, safely preserved but not seen by anyone. Here we have a still from the famous film, The Story of the Kelly Gang, which is the world's first feature film, and again survives only in part, about 17 minutes out of the hour-long feature. So, forgotten film fragments, are they really that important? Again, I may be speaking to the choir here, preaching to the choir, this expression says, but are they really that important? Well, I would argue, of course, they are. Partially lost films like The Moth of Moonbi are these important historical artifacts, part of our cultural memory that need to be preserved for future generations of Australians, because they offer valuable insights into our nation's past, and they reflect aspects of our cultural identity. I've written a lot of this because I've been talking to other filmmakers about the importance of knowing our film history. So that's why some of this is phrased in this particular way. But these films are part of our story as Australian filmmakers. I believe that, yes, we owe this debt to the past, to the filmmaking pioneers who produced these films and laid the groundwork for the industry and screen culture that we are part of today. Knowledge of our film history and the filmmakers who have gone before us enables us to better appreciate both their contributions and our own role in shaping a distinct national cinema. Just to further labour a point, here we have a quote from Robert Rosen, who is the former dean of the UCLA Film School. And he says, 500 years from now, people will look back and they'll say, this was the beginning of film. This was the first 100 years. These were the origins. Why didn't they take better care of it? And the they that they're talking about is us. So again, this is what I see as our responsibility, to not just forget about these film fragments and early films, but to actually do all that we can to save them and make them known and accessible. So the challenge for me, I was thinking about, okay, I really want people to appreciate these early films, but how can they, in order to do that, people need to be able to access it. And not just, I'm not meaning access in a physical sense here, you know, ordering a copy from the NFSA, or perhaps watching the umbrella release of, say, Moth of Moonbi. So it's both the physical, but it's also in terms of accessibility to story and characters. And that's very hard. It's very hard to access the narrative of a film that is so fragmented. So that's part of the problem. And then, of course, people need to be aware of that before they even want to access it and then appreciate it. So, so that's, I basically was working from a point of where I wanted people to be, and then when I was working backwards from that. So I'm starting now thinking about creating awareness about film fragments, in particular, lost films like the Moth of Moonbi, or partially lost films like the Moth of Moonbi, providing access to these films through recreation. And hopefully that will lead to a greater appreciation of those original lost film works. So recreation is, yeah, an attempt to really breathe new life into these film fragments. The questions that I was considering in doing this were thinking about, is creative speculation based on available historical material a valid means of recreating a lost film? Is that even something that, you know, is possible or worthwhile? If so, how might links to historical material be maintained to ensure that fidelity to the original work? So I'm not just making something because I want to make it, but that it's true to the original work and an authentic reproduction of the original artist's creative vision. Can recreations facilitate greater public access to and awareness of lost films and encourage an appreciation of original lost film works? So these sort of questions are rattling around in my head and have led to my research question, which is this. How might speculative approaches, and I'll talk more about them later on, be used to recreate missing scenes from Charles Chauvel's The Moth of Moonbi, while maintaining that authenticity to the original lost film work? Okay, so here we have a production still of a lost scene from The Moth of Moonbi. You can see Del Ferris here. She's been clutched by the villain of the piece, Blackjack Bronson, who's a cattle duffer. And this is Del's no good father, James Ferris, over here. So who's fallen asleep, obviously left his daughter exposed to the advances of this ne'er-do-well. So, okay, so my research focus is obviously, as I said, lost film. I'm also, as part of that, interested in film preservation principles and practices, looking at restoration and reconstruction, trying to, as part of that, thinking about the authority of the original work, rather than, as I said, just making something. And there are plenty of a number of silent film reimaginings that are out there that they just might take an idea, but they're not actually linked to historical material. They're just, you know, completely imagining what something may have been without any real historical evidence for that interpretation. So the authority of the original, authenticity, and what Walter Benjamin refers to as the aura of a work of art. Recreation, and this is something that William Rout has talked about in his and Ina Bertrand's piece on the story of the Kelly Gang. There was a booklet that came with that DVD release. If any of you have that, it's a wonderful resource and one that I've looked at extensively. And he talks about dreaming the film again. So he does a paper reconstruction of the film because, again, so much of it is missing, 17 minutes out of the hour feature. And he talks about, yeah, dreaming the film again, using these materials to be able to perhaps piece together what the film in its entirety may have been like. So while he was doing that on paper, I'm aiming to do that on film. So speculative approaches in film, so looking at recreation, as I've mentioned there, with William Rout, and also literature. So fields of adaptation, literary adaptation, and speculative biography are other areas I'm looking at. And of course, the specific focus of this is the Moth of Moonbi and the life and films of Charles Chauvel. So, significance of my research. My project, I believe, represents this new work in the field and contributes to new knowledge by, as I've said, highlighting the creative possibilities of lost film fragments, presenting recreation as a legitimate option for films where traditional reconstruction is impossible, demonstrating how speculative approaches can be applied to historical material to authentically recreate lost film scenes, exploring how recreations can be used to provide access to and greater awareness of original lost film works. Here we have a wonderful a wonderful newspaper advertisement for the Moth of Moonbi. So why the Moth of Moonbi? Out of all of the fragmented and incomplete Australian silent films, why did I pick this one? Well, there's a number of reasons. As I've mentioned, it's got this historical significance. As I said, it's the first feature-length film that Queensland that survives, even partially, and it marks the directorial debut of Charles Chauvel. The film also features renowned actor Arthur Torcher, who appeared in many Australian silent films, including the famous Sentimental Bloke. The Moth of Moonbi is also an interesting example of an Australian silent super film. This is a term that it seems to be a category of epic film that emerged in the mid to late 1920s. So other films, and I'm just making this up as far as a category, like it's just something I've noticed in looking at the other productions that were coming out around this time or shortly before. So other films in this category that run 9,000 feet or more include The Mystery of a Handsome Cab from 1925, which was 10,000 to 12,000 feet. Jeweled Nights, which was 10,000 feet, and For the Term of His Natural Life, of course, which was also 10,000 feet. But many films did not get to 9,000 feet in length. And while I'm not suggesting that, just by virtue of its length, it's an exceptional film, but it was a type of epic film that was being attempted at this time to go above and beyond the standard 5-reel Western. This is not just another Western. This is, according to the advertising, the first real Australian Western feature. So there's something different about this film compared to what had come before. It's not least for which, as I said, is its Queensland's origins. But for some of these elements, things that Chauvel was attempting here were above and beyond what had been done in this before. So another reason is that, of course, it's the usefulness of the surviving footage. Is that fortunately the film retains much of its basic narrative structure. It has a beginning where the characters and locations are set up and introduced. It has the middle where Dell ventures from, receives her inheritance and ventures from the country to the city, and scenes of her there. And then it also has the part of the ending where she has returned to the bush. Her relationship with her beau, Tom, is the local jackaroo is blossoming. And then the nefarious Blackjack Bronson sets about trying to abduct her. So it does have that beginning, middle, and end, incomplete, but you get a sense of what the story is. And within that, within the remaining footage, there are many of the film's key plot points, and I just alluded to some of them then. Another reason why The Moth makes a good candidate for recreation is that there's availability of historical material. There is quite a bit of historical material, production stills, and a lot of promotional material related to the film. So that's certainly helpful in being able to recreate or think about what, plug some of those gaps, narrative gaps in the film. Unlike a lot of other silent films as well that perhaps were set in cities, this is predominantly set in the country, and the original locations, it was shot in a rural area in the Fassifern Valley. And a lot of these locations, the one that I used for the cliff fight recreation of for the film's climax is today National Park, and the surrounding area is still predominantly agricultural. So, bush looks like bush, and and a lot of that, you know, not too many modern day markers that exist in some of these locations. The city scenes, of course, would be a challenge. But again, a lot of these places, one place that was cited was Tenerife House, the Hillcote residence there, and that was that particular location is a heritage listed house. So there are a few of these places that survive and that would be able to access. And another thing, as much as I've said that it's a super film and something different, at its heart, The Moth of Moonbi is a Western. Oh, it's sort of a combination of those popular genres of the day, the Western and a bit of the society melodrama sort of thrown in. And because of that reliance on generic tropes, trying to fill some of the gaps, you know where the story's going to end. When I was recreating the cliff fight scene, I didn't for a moment think that the good guy was going to go over the cliff. You know, it was going to be the hero and the villain are fighting, the heroine looks on, and over goes the villain of the piece. So so in terms of breaking new narrative ground in some of those elements, we're not doing that. There is this reliance on generic tropes, but so that's also helpful in recreation. Okay, and another reason, of course, of why Chauvel. Now, I've already talked about my personal admiration for Chauvel and what he achieved, but here are some other reasons that he, of course, is an important figure in Australia's film history. That he basically is the only Australian producer-director to work continuously through the 1920s to the 1950s. He successfully navigated the transition from the silent era to the talkies, and many of his contemporaries didn't. But then he went a step further and went to television as well and created the Australian Walkabout series in the 50s for the BBC. So I'm hard pressed to think of many directors generally that did that. I mean, one I can think of course, famously is Alfred Hitchcock, who went from the silent to the talkies to, of course, Alfred Hitchcock Presents in the 50s. But many directors didn't make those three transitions. So he's incredibly unique in that regard, and as I said, I believe stands alone in an Australian context. So another reason is that, of course, Chauvel has a significant body of work spanning those 3 decades. These include 9 feature films, the Australian classics among them, 40,000 Horsemen, Sons of Matthew, and Jedda, as well as war documentaries and short films, and as I mentioned, the 13-part Australian Walkabout series. Within this, he does have a distinct filmmaking style, and I haven't been able to find too much about Chauvel being considered an auteur, but I think there's something to recommend him in that capacity. I know, referring again to William Rout from another article that he wrote, he says this. He says, "It is not difficult to discern the authorial presence in Chauvel's work. Indeed, his are perhaps the most intensely personal films of the early Australian cinema, in the sense that they are instantly recognisable as Chauvel's." So again, there's something there that as far as trying to understand who he was, his approach to filmmaking, it's not guesswork from film to film. He does have a consistency. So I think that's very useful. The next one is that he is an enterprising showman who became the subject of and created this biographical legend. That's a quote from Stuart Cunningham in his book about Chauvel, featuring Australia. So this development of a biographical legend, he was the subject of numerous magazine and newspaper articles, as well as the book How They Made Sons of Matthew, which documented his making of that particular film. His biographies that were written by his wife Elsa and by his daughter Suzanne Chauvel Carlson, Rick's mother, all play into this and are very useful. And then finally, there's a wealth of archival material related to Chauvel and his films. So these include the feature films, documentaries, shorts, television series, production notes and correspondence, production stills, promotional materials such as posters and screening programs, newspaper articles and reviews, oral history interviews with members of the Chauvel family, and various cast and crew involved in his productions. And again, something that was unique about Chauvel was the fact that he wrote extensively throughout his career, and that he produced magazine and newspaper articles. He wrote correspondence lessons for a school of scenario writing that he started in the early 30s. He wrote scripts for produced and unproduced films and did novelizations of his films as well. So all of this material, together with personal letters and other writings, provides real insight into who he was and his approach to filmmaking. And another reason that I put down here too is that out of his body of work, even some of those examples I mentioned, is that a lot of those his mid to late career films have been concentrated on in a lot of evaluations, whereas there's been limited attention paid to his silent work, which is something I'm hoping to rectify. So the journey so far. Let's have a look at my time here. So basically, I recreated the Moth of Moonbi's climactic cliff fight scene, and this is in the link that I'd sent through. This is me at the Governor's Chair Lookout at Cunningham's Gap, which is where the location of the original cliff fight scene. And so this is where we shot it in an effort to sort of channel Chauvel and be there at that same location. And yes, so the lead up to the cliff fight scene, as you hopefully are aware by watching the clip that I sent through, is that the villainous cattle duffer Blackjack Bronson has planned to attack Dell in her remote bush shack. Dell's sweetheart, Tom Rizal, has discovered his plan and gives chase. And so we can see here are the characters. We've got Blackjack there, Dell and Tom. I won't play the clip now because we don't really have time. And also because it doesn't work so well in these sort of forums. It's better for you to watch it individually. But if you haven't done that, please have a look. So what did I use? So that was sort of the lead up to the final scene. The historical material I used to recreate the scene was footage from the Moth of Moonbi and the original cliff fight scene, some of which I was able to find in a documentary about Chauvel called Charles Chauvel, the Action Director, which was directed by John Phillips in I think about 1972. And that footage does not appear in the publicly available access copy from the NFSA of the Moth of Moonbi, nor does it appear in Umbrella Entertainment's 2013 release of the film. So I'm not sure where this footage that Phillips used in his documentary is. That's something that Rick and I hope to solve, a bit of a mystery when we visit the National Film and Sound Archive later this year. So yes, that footage was very useful. As I've mentioned, there's a whole bunch of other historical material, some of which is listed there, including the original sheet music, which was written by Metta McLean. There was one song written for the film, unlike some of the big American films that were scored from start to end. This film had one song called The Wonderful Moth of Moonbi. And so that sheet music was able to be used as well to compose part of the score. Oral history interviews with members of the cast and crew, very useful to be able to speak to Marsden Hassel, who plays Tom, or to listen to Marsden Hassel, I should say, and Doris Ashwin, or became Doris Hassel. They married after the film was complete. So to be able to hear their version of to hear their account of what happened with the cliff fight, and it's quite detailed, and a lot of material that I was able to work into my script for that scene. Also very useful is the Chauvel School of Scenario Writing correspondence lessons. As I said, Chauvel started this school possibly in around 1933. And in that, he basically outlines his approach to filmmaking in various ways over the course of 9 lessons or so, and 8 or 9 lessons. And so that material, being able to effectively hear what Chauvel, how he would approach a particular scene, what was important to him, that was very useful. And also as well, there's footage and historical material related to 3 Snowy Baker Westerns that Chauvel worked on in the early 1920s. So he sort of had a filmmaking apprenticeship of sorts with Snowy Baker, and worked his way up on his film. So I was able to watch and learn, and so parts of those earlier films, 2 of the 3 are lost, but certainly The Man from Kangaroo, it's very interesting to see parts of that and maybe think, oh yeah, a young Chauvel was here, part of this, watching this. This may have influenced certain decisions that he made on his first film a few years later. Again, I won't show the actual cliff fight recreation, but this is it. So again, I'd encourage you to have a look at that and see how that went. So here are just a few shots of, on the left is the original footage, or taken from John Phillips' documentary. And then on the right is the recreation that I did. You see how we've tried to match elements in terms of production design and costume. And so, yes, much of this I was pleased with, but this is obviously a work in progress and something that I'm continuing to learn and do things as I go forward. So as far as that is concerned, I've been critical in my reflections of it, and there are some things that I think that I would address as I go forward with other recreations. So that scene, as I said, was, or maybe I didn't say, was part of my my master's prior to my doctorate. So the lessons that I've learned from this is that some aspects of the cliff fight scene didn't faithfully reflect the original Moth of Moonbi. Remember, I've been talking about the need to be authentic and this fidelity to the original work. And these are some things that I've sort of picked up through talking to other people as well as my own reflections. So one is that the pace of the editing, and maybe you picked up on this, was too fast. So for instance, this particular sequence here, we've got 8 shots in about 13 seconds, maybe. So the duration of shots in silent films, and there are people who have done these, and I admire them, but I couldn't sit through, timing every single shot from all of these thousands of silent films. But they've done things in some of the average shot size is certainly much longer than I was allowing for in this situation here. So pace of editing, bit fast. Another thing, in my initial version, I don't think that this is the one I put up for you, but my initial version was that there was some gimmicky special effects that I thought I'd do. I don't know why. It was misguided, but including that dust and scratches, because I was trying to match the surviving footage. But as Ray's pointed out, and as I also spoke with Graham Shirley about it too, or emailed him about it, and he said, yeah, well, the original film, they wouldn't have had that. So try to keep it clean and avoid those sort of lines and scratches, etc. Another thing was that I found that there was an overuse of title cards. Perhaps this was my desire to be able to fill in some gaps. I became a bit expository. But again, we see 6 title cards, and I've seen, there are scenes, and this is again within a short period of time, maybe 40 seconds. And I've seen scenes between Tom and Dell, romantic, slow scenes where they're talking, and there might be 3 title cards in 2 minutes. So again, the pace of things was and the overuse of title cards maybe doesn't reflect that original film so much. And finally, the actor performances, and I think there was a need for more heightened melodrama at different times. And again, this is not the actor's fault. This was me, as the director, needing to get more of that. And you can see, particularly in the eyes here. So this is, this is Dell here, and just the wideness of those eyes. We've done the actors in my film, as I said, did a wonderful job, but I needed to get more of that sort of heightened melodrama, I think, in some parts of the scene. Okay, so lessons learned and my implications for my doctoral research and future recreation. So in order to maintain that faithfulness to the original Moth of Moonbi, I'm planning to do these things. One is to continuously monitor the authenticity of these future recreations by talking with my supervisory team at the university, but as well as that with individuals, perhaps people like yourselves as well, with specialist knowledge, skills and experience related to my research. I'm also doing more of a deep dive, if such a thing is possible. I'm going deeper into a research of Chauvel's life and films, and with Rick's assistance largely as well, with a particular focus on historical material related to his early life and the production of the Moth of Moonbi. I'm continuing to research and develop my understanding of this term authenticity as it relates to creative arts practice and the implications that this has for my research and recreation processes, to what it is to be authentic in a recreation. So the journey continues. So going forward, there's a few things, and I'll just cover these very quickly because I know I'm almost out of time. The death of Ferris. There's some key moments in the film that I think would be interesting to sort of flesh out, and that would help give the film a clearer narrative arc. So one is the death of Ferris. So one missing scene in The Moth of Moonbi involves Tom Rizal killing Dell's father, Ferris, in self-defense. Okay, he's a good bloke, Tom, but you know, in self-defense, he kills Dell's father. As we know, he's not a particularly nice bloke. This is a really important plot point in the story, as this incident becomes an obstacle to Tom and Dell's relationship. I mean, after all, it's a bit hard to be with a girl when you've killed her old man. So yes. So this is basically all that we have that remains of that in the print. And this is a really, again, this is one of my favorite shots in the film. There's this picture of Ferris hanging on the wall, and Tom and Dell are there in her shack, and you know, she's saying, "Oh, Tom, you will come and visit me sometimes, won't you?" And he's like, "Oh, yes." And they come in for a kiss, and then the old man's portrait falls off the floor, off the wall and onto the floor, and it dissolves into this shot. And we can see there's someone lying on the ground, two guys crouching over him, and that person with their back to us standing is Tom. And so this is the scene of Ferris. That must be Ferris on the ground dead. And then it dissolves back to the picture of Ferris, but it stops them from having their first kiss because it reminds him of what he's done. So this is the only surviving scene, image of the scene. But I think this is a key moment, as I said, because it relates to Tom and Dell's relationship. Another thing is the link between Ferris, Dell's father, and Blackjack Bronson. So in The Moth of Moonbi, it appears that Ferris and Blackjack are partners in a cattle duffing scheme. You can see this here. The connection between them is shown in these different production stills of missing scenes from The Moth of Moonbi. So the stills show we've got Ferris and Bronson drinking together. We can see Dell appears later in the scene, and then later still, and this is one of the shots I used earlier in my presentation, Ferris appears to have fallen asleep while Bronson tries to force himself on Dell and resist his advances. So fleshing out that relationship, that Ferris is actually, I should have mentioned, is the overseer of Moonbi Station. He's sort of the boss, but as this suggests, he's an inside guy. So he's in cahoots with Bronson, the cattle duffer, and maybe he's getting duffing cattle on the side with him. So that would be worth exploring. And it also sets up too Bronson's continual menacing of Dell that we see in the cliff fight scene and we see it at other points, but particularly here. One other one is about Tom and Dell in the city. So in The Moth of Moonbi, as I've said, Dell uses her £500 inheritance to travel to the city. In The Wild Moth, which is the novel, as I mentioned, that the film was based on, Tom also travels to the city and has a chance encounter with Dell on a ferry. Later, they meet and they spend a romantic evening together on the beach. But there is no surviving footage or production stills from The Moth of Moonbi of Dell and Tom in the city together. However, there are scenes of Tom visiting the city, which may indicate that city scenes involving Dell and Tom were shot but have now been lost. You can see here Tom arriving on the train. He inspects some cattle in a stockyard, and then he's driven somewhere, but we don't know where. And then that section of the film is missing. What I'm also doing as well is looking at documenting my research and recreation journey by filming my interactions, interviews with individuals with specialist knowledge, skills, or experience related to my research. So, of course, as I've mentioned, I've got Rick, Chauvel Carlson, who's been a great support and help to me. It just has obviously an extraordinary knowledge of his grandfather and his grandmother's work, and many lots of insights, advice, and materials that he's made available to me have been wonderful. We've also, as well, here's Rick and I with Ruben Hillier, who's an archivist at the State Library of Queensland. They had a print of Moth that we were able to look at, and even in that print, we were able to find some additional material that is not in the publicly available copies. So that's a hopeful start that there may be more in the NFSA. And then silent film experts is Ron West here, and another silent film expert from Brisbane, Joel Archer. So I've spoken with them extensively as well about their knowledge and experience. So yes, that's basically my presentation. This is us, you can see myself and Rick here at the cliff fight recreation on location at Spicer's Gap. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm looking forward to hearing any questions or comments that you might have.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. That's brilliant. So look, it's now open for questions and discussion. I might just add a little bit of background at this point. As Andrew pointed out, the surviving footage amounts to about 22 or 24 minutes, and the way the footage survived back in
I think it's about 33 minutes, Ray. Sorry.
33. Sorry. Okay,
Yeah.
that's even better. The way the footage survived was back in the 60s, sometime, a nitrate print of Greenhide, as it was presented. It came to Film Australia, or the Commonwealth Film Unit, as it was at the time, and Ron West, you've just seen, received it. He looked at it, and it turned out to be a combination of footage from Greenhide and Moth of Moonbi. Somehow, somebody had edited these two storylines together to make a single story. Goodness knows how they did that, but that's what they'd done. So he was able to separate the two sets of footage because of the differences in the obvious differences in the film stock, and so we have partial footage of Moth and partial footage of Greenhide. That material came to the National Library, and it was then copied. Now I haven't checked the catalogue details in NFSA about this to be sure whether it was copied on a 35mm or 16mm, but it was the practice in the 60s to save money at the National Library to copy nitrate film onto 16mm and burn the original. That's horrifying, isn't it? But that's what was done at the time because storage was a problem. Unfortunately, the copying not only reduced the quality by reducing from 35 to 16, but the copying was done at the cheapest available laboratory for a tender price, and it was done through the gate on a sound printer. So the image was cropped top, bottom, and left side, and so the image on the screen then appears to be off center, off balance. It appears from the stills that we've seen in Andrew's presentation that's what happened to Moth. I'll check this by going to the catalogue details on the NFSA website to see if there was a 35mm acetate preservation copy, but certainly from the stills, it looks as if that was the fate of Moth as well, that it was cropped top and bottom at the side, which was extremely unfortunate, but that's the way it survives. So that's the kind of starting point for Moth and probably for Greenhide and for other silent films. The survival rate that Andrew mentioned, our survival rate is much lower than the US for feature films. Yes, we do have approximately 50 silent feature films out of a total of 250. Most of those are fragments, not complete films. So, and that fragments can be just a few frames up to something like Moth, where you've got about half an hour of footage. So our survival rate is not good. So that's just a bit of background to the work being done. But I wonder if we have any questions or comments. Yeah, Peter. You're muted, Peter. Yeah.
I know. Very interesting, Andrew. I also have a long-standing interest in silent cinema and in talking about the representations of story and so on. I found your comments very interesting. I find this whole idea of recreating a film both an advantage and a disadvantage. I think the issue I have is that you're looking at a silent film from a contemporary prism. And because of that, the way the film is shot, the editing that you've already alluded to, the framing, there's a whole range of issues that mean that the film isn't exactly the same. It is a recreation, but and I always have issues with recreations. I mean, I still remember the hullabaloo when black and white films were colorized,
Right. Yeah.
and
Ted
that
Turner.
yeah, that was horrendous because that is supposedly using the colors that were used in the film, even though it was shot in black and white, all that sort of rubbish. It really isn't a recreation. It's a contemporary perspective and a guess about what the film would look like, etc. So. Okay, look, I looked at your footage and I found it very interesting, but it seemed a contemporary sort of approach, which isn't the way silent cinema and social history was represented at that time. And so I suppose I have a few misgivings about that. You also mentioned that there were very few silent film directors who satisfactorily transitioned to sound. Certainly in Australia, that's true, although I'm thinking of McDonough sisters, but certainly.
Sorry, Peter. I meant sound to talkies to television. That
To television.
that trifecta. Yeah. So yeah, a number went to talkies. That's certainly true, but less so went through to do television in the 50s and 60s. So that's
okay.
Yeah.
No, that's fair enough. No, I accept that because, of course, there have been a number of good filmmakers who've transitioned. So, all right. No, I found it very interesting what you're doing, and I think it's a really good topic for discussion in terms of a PhD, in terms of dissembling the whole issue of silent film being recreated. And the authenticity of that. Yeah, no, I really found that a great process. Look forward to seeing more about it.
Now
Thank you very much, Peter.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question from, I just see CRNC on my monitor. I don't know who it is, but could you unmute yourself and ask the question, please?
It's Quentin Turner here. How are you?
Oh, good. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Yep.
Okay. Hi, Andrew. Quentin Turner here. I first need to say that I'm actually but in a past life as an NFSA employee, I was involved in attempts to do reconstruction of the Douglas Morse and Frank Burley Australasian Antarctic Expedition films.
Oh,
and
right.
Even got as far as doing a live reconstruction at Adelaide Film Festival in 2004 and work in progress extracts at Pordenone in 2013.
Wonderful.
Now, what got in the way of that project being realised in the end was debates inside the NFSA about whether it was a restoration or reconstruction, and that if it was the second, that reconstructions were something institutional AV archives shouldn't be doing in principle. And I think that's also come up in the 21st century around attempts to revive Graham Shirley's and reconstruction term of natural life, and maybe reconstructing Soldiers of the Cross, which I think their project Ray will be familiar with. At the NAA, it's something that comes up when we talk about the sometimes very detailed documentation with otherwise lost silent films held in our copyright exhibitions collection, which actually includes Chauvel scripts, I should point out, and also fragments in our cinema and photographic branch collection, which is C5211 for people who want to look it up. So
Dropped out there, Quentin.
okay, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Yeah. Look, sorry. The question is, should AV archives themselves be undertaking reconstruction as a form of curatorial interpretation? but because it's speculative and it makes works, it's something that should be only left to independent scholars.
So, Andrew, do you have a comment?
I'm not. I should have said perhaps at the start that I'm actually not a silent film expert. I'm more, as I've said, I'm a fan that's of Chauvel's work, and I've come into to look at this material. So I don't have an extensive knowledge of. I certainly have an admiration for and some knowledge of silent film and Australian silent film at that. But I don't have some of the expertise perhaps of someone like yourself, Quinton, or certainly Ray and Peter as well. But I guess what interests me is I never for a moment meant for this to be a definitive thing. It can never be a definitive thing. The film's lost. So it's this material, unless it shows up, is we will never know what it was. And so rather than being, I think the way I'm trying to frame it, and this may be related to what you're saying as far as whether it's taken on at an FSA level, a curatorial level, or perhaps someone independent like myself, is that as the things that I produce, I'm trying to say, rather than this must have been what the scene was, this may have been what the scene was given the material that we've got and given what we know of Chauvel. It has to out of necessity incorporate that speculation, and I think that there is these recreations. I'm hoping would be these really signposts to the original film, so that they're rather, at the moment, as I said, it's really hard to get into the story. And as we watched Moth as well, just at that moment where Blackjack is breaking into her shack and about to abduct her, and then that's it. That's where the film stops. The cliff fight doesn't happen. So it's more about being able to have this material that's supplemental to the original. It's not looking to be inserted by any means into the original, but something that would flesh out aspects of the story and characters that, as I said, creates that appreciation for the original work, and maybe points, as I said, signposts, points people back to the original work and has them want to engage with it. Because at the moment, let's face it, by virtue of what they are, these films, people don't know about them, people don't want to access them. So that's what I'm trying to rectify. Whether or not that it falls to more official places like the National Film and Sound Archive taking those sorts of things on, but I think probably because of the speculative nature, and Ray would be able to speak to this too. Like, I think reconstruction, and this is my understanding or limited understanding of things to do with the FIAF guidelines and all sorts of things, and Ray's own work relating to restoration and reconstruction, that authority of the original and what you can and can't do in that context. I'm sort of, going a step beyond those things to include that, out of necessity, include that speculation and trying to fill some gaps.
Yeah, perhaps I could add in something there that related to well, first of all, let's be clear that restoration and reconstruction are two different things.
Yes.
Restoration is what the NFSA has been doing for a while. The NFSA Restores program, which is putting films that have been out of circulation from the 70s onwards back on the screen by restoring faded colour, and so basically restoring faded colour or other problems in original material, but not in reconstructing the film in any way, just removing the effects of age. The reconstruction is what you do with a film that doesn't survive complete, and where you're trying to, in one way or another, make it presentable to a modern audience and attractive to a modern audience. And there are many different ways in which you can approach that. And it brings up, of course, many philosophical arguments. And just to demonstrate that, what we did with for the term Doctoral Life in 1980 was to say, okay, there are two incomplete versions that survive. One is the incomplete Australian release version, where there were 6.5 out of the original 10 reels. The other was an incomplete copy of the American release version, where I think there were 6 out of the original 7 reels. The film was recut and storyline changed for American release. There was never a script of the term. the director, Norman Dorn, worked from a marked up copy of the novel. He didn't have a script. In trying to, in saying, okay, can we make the film accessible to a modern audience? Because right now it only exists, it's there on the shelf. Nobody's much going to look at it except the occasional researcher. Can we present this part of our silent film history in a way that is attractive to a contemporary audience? That was the objective. And therefore, can we do that by melding parts of the two surviving incomplete versions and also any other material from the film that might have survived in other ways in fragments and other collections. So that's what we set about doing. And to do that, it was Graham Shirley that put the pieces together. Where there were gaps, we filmed them with titles and with montages of stills. There was quite a large surviving collection of stills from the film. And so we were able to create a narrative that was almost certainly not the original narrative, because there was no script, and we can only judge from two different versions of the film what the original Australian narrative might have been, but it was our attempt to recreate as far as possible the original Australian narrative. And where necessary, we took a technical step of, and this was budget limited because we had a certain amount of money to work with, of slowing down certain scenes by stretch printing, which means you print. We worked out that the original shooting speed of turn was probably about 20 frames a second. And so by printing every third frame twice, we could come down to a realistic speed for certain scenes. One scene where we went far beyond that was in the storm scene, where a model ship was being tossed. There's a big storm at sea. There's a model ship that's being tossed around in the waves and so on. And so model shots of the ship are interspersed with shots of the deck of the ship being deluged with water. They were studio scenes. These were intercut. And then scenes of the two main characters in one of the cabins being deluged with water and so on, and the cabin was being rocked around, etc. So we took a step with the model shots, and we slowed them down by a factor of 4. As they stood, they looked like a bathtub toy bouncing around, you know, and it was our opinion that in a highly dramatic scene, that a modern audience would break up laughing when they saw the model shots. Rightly or wrongly, that was our evidence. That was our decision. If we wanted a modern audience to enjoy a silent Australian drama and take it seriously, then we had to eliminate anything that would send a modern audience off on the wrong track. And so with those shots, we slowed them down enormously. We feel the effect worked, but we weren't aware that anyone else within the FIAF network had done that. We also were able to add the nearest we could approach to an authentic music track, which was a story in itself, and we were able to add the colour tints, or an approximation of the colour tints and tones, taking a cue from the incomplete Australian release printed, the grammar that they used for the colours. So that was what we did with Term. We explained what we did in a rolling title at the beginning, and more extensively in a brochure that we printed for distribution and screenings. So we wanted to make it clear to people that you are not seeing the original film. You are seeing our best approximation of the Australian release version, and this is what we have done to get there. And so that was how we presented it. Now, we showed this film at the FIAF Congress, which was held in Canberra in 1986, 2 years after the NFSA was created. And we had a symposium on restored and reconstructed films. So we showed Term. We caused a little bit of debate about what we did to it. Some of our fair colleagues were not impressed with what we did, but we explained why we'd done what we'd done. And our work was compared with the work of Eno Patalas, who had done the latest reconstruction of Metropolis. And Enno's approach was we had to somehow, I'm not sure how we managed to do this, to try to slow down the projectors in the National Library, the theatre where it was shown, to something like 20 frames a second. I'm not sure how we managed to do that. Anyway, that was the scene that was so that his reconstruction was shown at that rate, and then it was stopped periodically, so that he would come out and explain the missing bits, and then we would go on and show the next bit, and then he'd come out and explain the missing bit there. And in his terms, the only way you can present an incomplete film, a reconstruction of an incomplete film, was to do it that way and to personally explain the missing parts. And you had to show it on a projector that had been wound down to the correct projection speed. Okay, so that's, if you like, a European approach to presenting a film where parts of the film are still missing. Now, that's might be fine, it might work in Europe. We felt that nothing like that would work in Australia. We wanted the film to be seen and distributed in commercial cinemas, and there's absolutely no way we would achieve anything like that. We had to have a product that we can say to the exhibitor, here it is, ready to go, put it on. And we had to accept that it would be screened at widescreen ratio at 1.85. It was shot at 1.33, but by that time, all Australian cinemas had thrown away their original lenses, and so they were using widescreen ratio for everything. So if you showed an older film, it was cropped top and bottom, and we knew that's the way it would be shown. And we were fortunate that the way term is composed photographically is that for most part you're not aware of that. You get away with it. So the audience was watching a 1.85 ratio image when the original film was in 1.33. Again, we used part of our budget to bring the title footage, the main titles, into 1.33 ratio with black band on either side, so that we could see the full title. But we couldn't afford to do that with the whole film. So these are the compromises we made, and they were made in the interest of having the film shown as widely as possible. Now, so in presenting a silent film to a modern audience, you're faced with all these challenges. And one of those challenges is what Andrew's doing, is saying, well, okay, this is a way of filling in the missing parts, not to pretend that this is what it really looked like, but to try to give you a sense of that you can appreciate the whole film by having these reenacted sequences. So that's the sort of philosophical dilemma or discussion, or part of it, that we face in representing silent films. In the Australian context, of course, we face the further problem that the material we're working with has often been disfigured by bad copying onto 16mm, and that's pretty hard to compensate for. So that's a further limitation. Yeah. Any comments on that? No. Okay. So well, it's a challenging thing, and we have a number of other silent films in the collection. Some are still complete; they never get shown anywhere. But we have many more films that are partial, and they certainly don't get shown anywhere. You can only look at them by going to the archive, basically, which is hardly a satisfactory state of affairs. There is a film in production at the moment on Soldiers of the Cross. A Melbourne company is making a feature documentary about the Limelight Department, and they will presumably be doing some sort of reconstruction within that documentary of the slide sequences. And I don't know about trying to recreate any footage, but that is in production at the moment. I'm not sure when that's going to be finished. But it's been done in cooperation with the Salvation Army Museum, which has quite an array of original slides now in its collection. But of course, none of the footage of Soldiers of the Cross. That none of the footage shot by the Limelight department actually survives from that production. The only footage we have that has survived is the contract work they did for the Victorian and New South Wales government for shooting of the Federation ceremonies and the royal visit. So that we'll wait and see what they do. But there it is. It has that dilemma built into it. I think it's Andrew, are you aware of anyone else anywhere in the world doing anything quite like what you're doing?
There's one person that comes to mind is Guy Maddin in Canada, but his work tends to be more of that art film type, so he's dreaming the films again. And there's a film of his called the Forgotten Room or the Forbidden Room. And again, it lists as part of its influences the Blue Mountains Mystery, which is known as a lost Australian film. Graham Shirley put me onto that actually, and I had a look at it, and he said to me, I couldn't discern the Blue Mountains Mystery anywhere in that film. So it was one of those things that, as I said, you can say, oh yes, it's got this, but there's something to be influenced by a film and just going off your own bat to create something that has a silent film aesthetic, which is what Guy Maddin chiefly does. I mean, he's an artist. That's what he does. He's produced these sort of art film versions that have a silent film aesthetic. Whereas, as far as being able to try to recreate things using historical material, and as I said, these sort of speculative approaches, adaptation, trying, things to fill in gaps, and basically, being able to tether parts of what you're recreating to historical truth, like, in terms of this production still, this report, we've got to, over the course of this scene, we believe this is what happened. We believe, no, this shot happened at some point, and this other shot happened at this earlier point, and this other one happened here. How do we get from A to B to C to create some sort of narrative continuity, flesh out aspects of the characters that, and create a scene that when watched within the broader context of the film makes sense. And as I said, this is not to say you can never say this is what the film was, because as you experienced with Term, as I've sort of been certainly experiencing with Moth, we just will never know. We have an idea, and I'm just looking at trying to explore that in a way that others could hopefully see, and then again it might lead them to an appreciation of it. Because as I said, it's a I come to this from a point of view of so much of this material, so many of these early films people just don't know about, and it may be, maybe some of them just aren't that good, but I believe that it is an important part of our history. I believe some of them, there is merit in revisiting them and trying to find ways for modern audiences to access them. And of course, it's a pretty niche thing. I'm not talking about getting on Netflix with this stuff. This is something that for people who have an interest in our film history, whether it's, and it may not be archivists and preservationists who believe in a particular way of doing things. It may be just people who are film fans, film nerds, who just like silent film, have an interest in it, and want to find out more about our history through it. That's sort of what I'm wanting to do. But I've seen, Ray, there's a woman who has done a recreating the silent films or using silent film fragments and AI. So where she's basically fed in all of these short film fragments and then just had the machine make something from it. And it's very, again, it's like an art film. It's all got the research, and she's looking at all her algorithms and how she's done these particular things. But it's like, as far as even to have a recognizable human being, there are parts of it where I watch it and you just see this sort of film and it sort of morphs into this other thing and this other, it's more like shapes. And it's like Guy Maddin, all of this stuff, it seems, is framed around an idea of, and I know I used William Rout's dreaming thing, and I mean that in a different context. This stuff is literally like, it's it's as nonsensical as a dream. Like it doesn't have there's no narrative to it. It's just a mishmash of images that sort of looks like a silent film, or you know, or a film in various stages of decomposition morphing into other things. And that's, you know, that might be fine. That's what she's trying to do, and she's looking at AI in particular. But I haven't found anyone that's trying to be, you know, just trying to not just go down an artistic route of just, I'm just going to explore this because I want to explore it, but it's actually trying to use historical material to get as close as is knowable back, you know, to the original work. So, and that's, I mean, I have seen a great example, and it's not a silent film, but if you have a chance to see, I think it's available on YouTube, is Peter Jackson's recreation of the Lost Spider Pit scene from King Kong. That is, you know, when he was making his version of King Kong in 2005, he had obviously money left over. And he got a group of his creatives there at Weta in New Zealand, and they recreated this scene that apparently the director, his name's escapes me, has that he burnt because it was so shocking. It was a scene where Kong was pursuing, or they were being pursued by a dinosaur, and then Kong's on the other side of the log, and there's a pit, and the sailors fall into the pit and are then devoured by these weird and wonderful creatures, spider-like creatures and all this sort of thing. And it was so shocking that, is it Marion? Marion was the filmmaker. And Marion Cooper. He burnt it. He burnt the scene because it stopped the film. And he's like, well, this isn't the end yet. This is not my shocking bit. So they cut it and got rid of it. And Jackson recreated it. And so check that out. It's on YouTube. But he again, and I think Michael Jackson, I think Peter Jackson got a bit burnt with Forgotten Silver. Remember the uproar that caused? So in any of his assessments of that, and in the DVD commentary that he gives, you know, because it's on the DVD version that I have, he's very, very, very much downplays the historiography of this work. He's like, oh no, this is never intended. This is just film fans doing this sort of thing. But actually, he was very, very methodical in the way that he went about that. And because he's Peter Jackson and was a King Kong fan, he has access to a lot of the original armatures, the original puppets and things that were used, and was, you know, and he used the same processes that the original artists would have used in terms of sculpting particular things. And you know, he didn't use CGI, is what I'm saying. And you know, he did all these sorts of things in a very interesting way. So that's one one example that I've looked to, going, well, that's pretty. That's interesting, and it does flesh out your sort of, you know, knowledge and understanding of the film that little bit.
I'm not sure if everybody knows about has heard of Forgotten Silver. Have you? Is this familiar to people?
That's
not to everyone. It's maybe it's a mockumentary. It's about a filmmaker, Colin McKenzie, who never existed. And so it creates this whole story about the life of this forgotten filmmaker, his silent comedies, his huge epic Salome that was filmed at the bush in New Zealand, and he went as a cameraman to the Spanish Civil War, and as he ran out to help a soldier who'd just been shot, he put his camera down, still running, and he shot his own death. This is the and so this hour-long documentary portrays his life, shows scenes from clips from his films, and in the course of it, the producers actually discover the set for Salome buried in the New Zealand bush, and there's the reels of films still sitting there, and so they're brought back to the New Zealand Film Archive, which cooperated in this production, by the way. And where there they are reassembled. The film was never finished, of course. It was a bit biblical epic, never finished. And they were then represented at the New Zealand International Film Festival. That's it. In the course of it, there are interviews with some well-known personalities, like Leonard Maltin, And it's terribly convincing. And so as you watch this, there are little clues, you know. So there's at some point Joseph Stalin, when he was brought into Colin Mackenzie's production company. Stalin, you know, beginning of communism. Oh, that was there. And so there's an interview with the Russian ambassador, Alexander Nevsky. Now, you know, there are these little clues you might sort of think, jot a bit and think, is that real? You know. Anyway, the whole thing is a hoax. And it was shown on New Zealand television, just shown live. And then I think the next day, it was announced on television news that the film was a hoax. And there was a public outrage that about doing that. People wanted to believe it. And suddenly all this illusion had been created to be destroyed.
Well, I think, Ray,
it's a film well worth seeing if you haven't seen it, but it is brilliantly done.
I think, Ray, as well, it ruffled a few feathers because there are a number of film critics, you know, people who should know about this, and they said, "Oh yes, we're aware of the work of Colin Mackenzie," and they shot their mouths off, and then they got highly embarrassed when they're like, "I made him up." And I love that. The funniest thing in that, one of the fun, well, there's so many funny things, but he starts the film where he's Jackson is on camera and he's saying, "I've just discovered this woman. She's got some things belonging to her. I think it was her husband or her father." And he goes, "Come and we'll check him out." And he literally leads you down the garden path as he goes around to look at the film. So it's very clever. But as I said, since then, and because of the uproar, I think, you know, when Jackson came to do this, because he's a film buff, and when it came for him to do this stuff with King Kong, I think as well, he's like, "Oh, look, I'm just saying, you know, I'm just doing this because, you know, I'm not meaning for this to be real, you know, I'm not meaning for this to be, you know, replace the lost scene." You know, he was very much downplaying that sort of the seriousness of it. But as I said, I think, you know, he did a really great job. And as far as authenticating various aspects of his recreation of that Lost Spider Spit scene, I don't know what else he could do, really. Anyway.
There it is. Peter points out that Sam Neill was in it, and would you believe Harvey Weinstein? So, yeah. Okay, well, look, we're just about out of time, so thank you, Andrew. It was a terrific presentation, and we wish you all the best for the rest of the project. We look forward to the next stage of it.
Yes, thank you, Ray. Yeah, well, look, as I said, you know, I'm just I feel very privileged to have been asked to present to such to this group. As I said, I've tuned in, and I find so much of the material that I've been looking at is written by people like yourself, Ray, and I've seen Andrew Pike and Graham Shirley and Peter, your work as well, you know, so and others, you know, many people who have that I'm now, you know, these are sources, these are providing the foundation for a lot of the work that I'm sort of looking at. And just as there was this big sort of focus on in the 60s, 70s and 80s on our, you know, looking to the past, and not, you know, with the new wave and everything, looking at, well, we did have a film industry before this. Yeah. I'd love to see that same sort of attention again on films prior to, you know, 1973. So that's another story, but this is maybe a small part of something like that.
Okay,
right, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you again,
Thank
Andrew.
you.
Thank you all for joining in, and if the weather's good, have a very nice remainder of the Sunday afternoon. So thank you all.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers. All the best. Andrew.